What are the pros and cons of living in Boise, Idaho? Well, let's find out. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Summer Aston. I'm a realtor in the beautiful Boise, Idaho area with Silver Creek Realty Group, and I make new videos each week all about living in Boise and Boise real estate. So make sure you hit the little notification bell or consider subscribing because you're not going to want to miss them. I'm sure you've been hearing all the buzz about Boise, Idaho being such a great place to live, but there's got to be a downside, right? Well, Boise is an awesome place to live, but there are just a few downsides. So listen up and I'll give you my honest opinion of the pros and cons of living in Boise, Idaho. Keep in mind that some pros can be cons and some cons can be pros. It's all about your personal perspective. So just keep an open mind and let's start with the pros. There's so many great things about living in Boise, but let's start with the number one thing I get asked by every single out-of-state client. Is Boise safe? And the answer is yes. Boise was even ranked the 8th safest city in the world. And honestly, knowing that you and your family are going to be safe in the community that you choose to live in is one of the most important things for your mental health and your stress levels. So if safety is what you are looking for, you will find it in Boise. And it's also very safe in the surrounding communities like Meridian, Eagle, or Star. Another huge reason people love living in Boise is all of the amazing outdoor recreation. There's almost anything that you could want to do here. There's mountain biking, running, horseback riding, there's skiing, fishing, snowboarding, snowmobiling, hunting, there's ATVing, camping, rock climbing, hiking, there's boating, there's hiking paths, there's walking trails, there's a river, there's river rafting, there's kayaking, and there is even surfing. It is on the river, so you gotta be really brave to do it, but you can surf in Boise. Now this next one kind of depends on where you are moving here from, but in general, Boise is very affordable and the cost of living is one of the main reasons people move to Boise. The average price of a home right now in Ada County is right around the $370,000 mark. And everything else like taxes, gas, your children's activities, and things like medical bills are all generally going to be less than they are in our states to the west. The cost of living has been rising rapidly, but it still falls below all of the major cities to the west of us, and it is still less than places like Salt Lake City or Phoenix. It's also less than most of the cities on the East Coast. Now, if you're coming from the Midwest, it might be a little more here, but overall, the cost of living in Boise is very doable. Another fantastic thing about living in Boise or in Idaho in general is all of the wonderful school choices. So you can choose between public schools, charter schools, private schools, online schools, homeschool, and a combination of dual enrollment with homeschool and these other schooling options. And the state of Idaho in general just enjoys more political freedom than some of the states to the west do. And having that extra political freedom is honestly one of the main reasons why people are moving to Boise. Another great thing about living in Boise, Idaho is a small town feel with all the fantastic things that you would expect from a big city, especially as it relates to the arts and culture. There's all kinds of theater like Broadway shows and the Idaho Shakespeare Festival. There are all kinds of musical programs from the Boise Philharmonic to jazz festivals. There's always something going on in downtown Boise for everyone. And generally, all of these events are very accessible. It's easy to get into downtown to experience some fun cultural activity. One thing I really appreciate about living in Boise, Idaho is it is a very healthy city. It has been ranked in several different magazines as one of the healthiest cities in the United States. And that has to do because of the combination of the amount of gyms. There seems to be a gym on every corner and a gym to fit everybody's lifestyle. But besides the gym, you will see so many people outside in Boise just enjoying the outdoors and getting physically fit that way. And then Boise and many of their surrounding towns offer great farmers markets with local food and healthy meat choices and organic fruits and vegetables. Since Boise is largely surrounded by farms, it's pretty easy to have access to really healthy food, and you can get that at the farmers markets. And the last pro I'm going to mention in this video about living in Boise, Idaho is that everybody is just kind and respectful. Well, maybe not everyone, but the majority of the people here in Boise are. There's a really great sense of community. People often volunteer together. The schools have a ton of support from the parents. And even within your own neighborhood that you live in, you'll find a great sense of community. All right, here's what you're really waiting for. You want to hear the bad things about living in Boise. So I'm going to start with the one that I hate, and that is the inversion. So the inversion is in the winter, usually comes in January, and that is when the cold air sits in the valley with this gray cloud layer and the warm air goes above. I've got a video all about the weather in Boise you can check out right here if you want more details on that. But it's a generally dismal time in Boise. It gets colder and colder and colder, sometimes down to having highs in the single digits if it stays around long enough, and the air quality gets really bad. Now, if you want to get away from the inversion, you can go up to the ski resort or up to the mountains. The sun is shining up there and it's beautiful, and so that's what a lot of people do. Or, if you're saving enough money by living here, go to Hawaii. But the good news about the inversion is it doesn't happen every year and it doesn't stay that long. Usually it only stays for a week or two, and then it clears out back to the beautiful blue skies. The next problem with living in Boise, and it's really a bigger problem than the inversion is the poor city planning for growth. Now, the growth has exploded in the last few years, so nobody expects a city to be able to catch up with that quickly. But it would have been nice if they had thought ahead and planned for it before it happened. Because of the poor city planning, you're going to see a hodgepodge of neighborhoods and infill lots, apartments, duplexes, all together in the same areas. And that's okay to have a hodgepodge. It's kind of nice to have a mix in the community. But what gets really frustrating is where they're building all the new homes out in the newer areas. They're just building like crazy, and they're not putting in anything like parks. They're not putting in any stores. They're not putting in any schools. It's just houses and these country roads. They can't put in bigger roads fast enough to catch up with the growth. So there is a lot of traffic, especially when you get out to all the new subdivisions that are on the old farm roads with just stop signs. Those stop signs can be backed up for a really long time during rush hour. And with this city planning, they aren't really doing any master planned subdivisions. There are a couple master plan communities that are starting to get a little bit more popular here, but that's really the exception to the rule. And without master planned communities, there is no plan in place then for a new school to be somewhere by all the new houses, or a store, or a park. There are parks in the subdivision parks, but I'm talking about city parks. And in general, the city of Boise itself has just kind of been rezoning everything to get as much density as they can. So have you ever been to the Phoenix area and they have these big, beautiful parkways driving through the cities that have trees in the middle, and they have these master plan communities? And as the city grows more and more, they already have things in place like where the schools are going to be and where the apartments are going to go and where the stores are going to go, and they're able and ready to handle that growth. That does not happen in Boise or any of the surrounding towns in Boise. Just know that living in Boise right now means poor city planning, dealing with construction, and lots of busy, backed up farm roads if you're going to live in one of those subdivisions that's on the outskirts of town. Now, in general, I do like the airport in Boise. It's super easy to get in and out of, and it's not very crowded. Even with all of our growth, it's not too crowded yet. But I have to put this on the con list because we tend to travel more living in Boise because it's kind of isolated and because most of our family does not live here. And Boise almost never has direct flights to any other city, and it's more expensive. So a big negative of living in Boise is the flights are more expensive and they take longer to get anywhere because there's no direct flights, unless you're flying to Salt Lake or Seattle, and that's about it. Another negative about living in Boise is low wages, and our cost of living has risen a little bit. We have a lot of people coming from other states who are keeping their work from home jobs, and so they can afford living here quite well. But the local Idahoans who are still stuck at the low Idaho wages are having a really hard time with the cost of living rising so much here. Idaho's minimum wage is still $7.25, but the cost of housing has jumped almost 20% a year for the past few years. The low wage disparity here in Boise is becoming more apparent, and it really is a problem. There really aren't too many other negatives about living in Boise, but in general, it's a great place to live. There's one more con I want to mention though, and it is a little bit isolated. If you're on the east end of Boise and you drive all the way to the west side of civilization, like out past Caldwell, that takes about 45 to 50 minutes. But if you're on that east side of Boise, you only drive about 10 minutes and you're in the middle of nowhere. It is really beautiful. You have mountains to the north, you have desert to the south, farmland to the west. You're about a 5.5 hour drive from Salt Lake City. You're about a 7.5 hour drive from Seattle, a 7.5 hour drive from Portland. You're about a 9 hour drive from Sacramento, and you are about a 14 hour drive from Southern California. I know because I've driven all of those drives a lot. So there's definitely some benefits to Boise being isolated. Everyone has kind of left it alone for a long time. But when you move here from another state and all of your family stays behind and you need to go visit them a lot, or they need to come visit you, it does feel a little isolated. So those are some pros to living in Boise and some cons to living in Boise. What do you think? Have you lived here for a while and you have a new opinion of it? Are you thinking of moving here and you have questions about those pros and cons and maybe some that I didn't address? Well, leave a comment down below. I'll do my best to answer it. And I will be making more videos all about living in Boise, and I will make some more videos addressing more in detail some things like the cost of living in Boise. So if you want to make sure you don't miss those, please consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.